Okay, so when you think Egyptian pharaoh, chances are the guy you're picturing is Ramesses II. His name is pretty much synonymous with ancient Egypt's power, its wealth, and its sheer ambition. He's a legend, no doubt, but the real story, the one we're diving into, is how this one man so masterfully built his own myth that it's lasted for over 3,000 years.
First, let's just try to wrap our heads around the scale here. Ramesses II was on the throne for 66 years. I mean, just think about that for a second. In an era where you were lucky to see 30 or 40, entire generations of people were born, lived their whole lives, and died knowing only one pharaoh, Ramesses.
And his legacy, when you break it down by the numbers, it's just staggering. And it feels like every part of it was designed for maximum impact. He reportedly fathered over 100 children. Talk about securing the dynasty, right? He celebrated 13 royal jubilees, which were basically these huge festivals to constantly hit the refresh button on his divine power. He built more monuments than any other pharaoh in 3,000 years of history. And his brand? Well, it was so powerful that 9 later pharaohs actually took his name, just hoping a little of that magic would rub off on them.
So that really brings us to our main question today. Plenty of pharaohs were powerful, but he's the one we consistently call Ramesses the Great. So how did he do it? How did he earn that title? Well, we're going to explore 3 key pillars that cemented his status: his mastery of both war and peace, his absolute obsession with building, and his ultimate campaign to become a living god. Let's start with his role on the world stage. See, Ramesses inherited a massive problem: the formidable Hittite Empire. They were the other superpower on the block, rivals for control of the Middle East. And to be seen as a real pharaoh, Ramesses couldn't just sit back and rule. He had to prove he was a warrior.
And that brings us to his defining military test, the Battle of Kadesh. This was a huge deal. It was one of the largest chariot battles ever fought, a real clash of the titans between the 2 superpowers of the day. And the story Ramesses told about this battle, well, it would become one of the greatest propaganda campaigns in all of history. And here is where you see this massive gap between the official story and what probably happened. On temple walls all over Egypt, Ramesses is the lone hero, single-handedly smashing his enemies. But historians, when they look at records from both sides, see a strategic disaster. The Egyptian army was ambushed, it was chaos, and they barely escaped. At best, it was a very costly stalemate. But here's the twist, and this is where Ramesses showed he was a genius. He realized that this endless war was just a drain on everyone, so about 15 years later, he negotiated the Kadesh Peace Treaty. And get this, it's the world's first known international peace agreement. This was the real prize. It ended the fighting, brought stability, and freed up a ton of resources for what he really wanted to do. His true victory wasn't on the battlefield, it was at the negotiating table.
All right, so let's move on to pillar number 2 and see how this newfound peace allowed Ramesses to completely transform Egypt's landscape forever. With the borders secure, he just unleashed this building spree that no pharaoh before or since has ever even come close to matching.
And he wasn't just, building for the sake of it. Everything had a purpose. He founded a whole new capital city, Pir Ramesses. He built the Ramesseum, which wasn't just a temple, it was a massive economic hub. He carved Abu Simbel right out of a mountain down in Nubia to project power over the region's crucial gold mines. And in the Valley of the Kings, he built the biggest tombs for himself and his many sons. He wasn't just adding to Egypt, he was redefining it in his own image.
And nothing captures his mindset better than this inscription, which Greek historians famously recorded from a giant statue at his temple. Now, Ozymandias is just the Greek version of his throne name, Usermahatra. But the message, wow. It's a direct challenge to the future, a boast of power so immense that it basically dares anyone, anywhere, to even try to match what he's done.
Okay, so building monuments for the gods is one thing. But for Ramesses, that wasn't the endgame. His ultimate ambition, the move that truly set him apart, was to take his place right alongside them. Not after he died, but while he was still alive. This was his most radical and probably most effective political move. You see, traditionally, the pharaoh was called a Nedger Nefer, or perfect god. This meant he was a divine link, a successor to the god Horus on earth, but he was still fundamentally human. He was serving the big gods like Ra and Amun. Ramesses, he just threw that tradition right out the window. Just look at this scene from his temple at Abu Simbel. There he is, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the three great state gods. The message was loud and clear, and for the time, probably pretty shocking. He wasn't their servant. He was their equal. And he reinforced this idea everywhere. His giant statues weren't just art. People actually worshipped them as divine go-betweens, as hearers of prayer. He used his record-breaking 13 Sed festivals to constantly renew and broadcast his divine power. And, maybe most ingeniously, as he got really old, into his 90s, this whole "I'm a god" thing became the perfect cover for his physical decline. The frail old man was hidden behind the mask of an eternal, all-powerful deity.
So, the propaganda machine was a massive success. But after he died, modern science gave us a peek behind the curtain, revealing the very human reality of the man who wanted to be a god.
Yeah, forensic analysis of his mummy tells a very different story. He had crippling spinal arthritis that would have forced him into a hunched-over posture. He had severe dental problems, including a jaw abscess that must have caused just excruciating constant pain. A far cry from the perfect god-king on the temple walls, right? This was a man enduring the harsh realities of extreme old age.
And his mummy's journey after death is almost as incredible as his life. Priests had to move his body multiple times to protect it from tomb robbers, eventually hiding it in a secret cache where it lay for nearly 3,000 years before being rediscovered in 1881. But then, in 1975, as it started to fall apart, it took one last unbelievable trip.
And this is where the story gets just wonderfully weird. In order to travel to Paris for preservation work, Ramses II was issued a modern Egyptian passport. His occupation was listed as King Deceased. He was even greeted at the Paris airport with the full military honors you'd give to a visiting head of state. Just incredible.
So it all leads to this final thought. Ramesses was a master of propaganda, an architect of his own myth. His mortal body was frail, it was racked with pain. But the story he carved into stone, the story of Ramesses the Great, has survived for over 3,000 years. So you have to ask yourself, didn't he, in the end, get exactly the immortality he was looking for?